The Boeing 747 cruised at 37,000 feet above the Iraqi desert, its first-class cabin wrapped in the artificial twilight of dimmed LED strips. In Seat 8B, Valentina Viper Kozlov appeared to be just another wealthy passenger catching sleep on the red-eye to Dubai. Her Hermes scarf draped casually over a worn leather jacket, designer sunglasses perched on auburn hair that had seen too many helmet creases. The flight attendants whispered about the woman who'd paid cash for the seat upgrade, nodding the way she sat, spine straight even in sleep, hands positioned as if gripping something invisible. What they couldn't see were the scars tracing her knuckles from ejection handles, or the way her eyes tracked movement behind closed lids. Valentina had made her fortune in aerospace consulting after leaving the Air Force, but money couldn't erase muscle memory. Even at 40,000 feet in civilian clothes, she remained perpetually ready for war. The first sign something was wrong came as a vibration through the aircraft's aluminum skin, not turbulence, but something else. Valentina's eyes snapped open, pupils dilating as she processed the subtle wrongness in the engine's harmonics. Around her, passengers dozed on, oblivious to the frequency shift that spoke of mechanical distress to those who understood aircraft like native language. Then came the announcement that would change everything. Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing a minor technical issue and will be making an unscheduled landing at Al-Assad Air Base in Iraq for inspection. The captain's voice carried the practiced calm of someone delivering rehearsed lies. Minor technical issues didn't require military airfields unless something had gone catastrophically wrong. Valentina's phone buzzed with an encrypted message that made her blood freeze. Viper, Al-Assad under siege. Hostile forces moving on the base. Need immediate air support. No one else available. The Warthog is fueled and waiting. Ghost. The message came from Colonel Marcus Ghost Rodriguez, her former squadron leader and the only man who knew she kept her flight certifications current despite her civilian status. She stared at the message, feeling the familiar weight of decision that had once made her the most feared A-10 pilot in the 355th Wing. Around her, passengers grumbled about delays and missed connections, unaware that their unscheduled stop was about to become ground zero for a battle that would determine whether 5,000 American personnel lived or died. As the 747 began its descent toward Al-Assad, Valentina caught her reflection in the window, Billionaire consultant dissolving into something harder, more dangerous. The desert below stretched endlessly, hiding an enemy force that had spent months planning this assault. They had chosen their moment perfectly. Skeleton crew, minimal air assets, no backup within range. What they hadn't counted on was a ghost from the sky about to remind them why they called her Viper. The wheels touched down on scorched tarmac as mortars began falling in the distance. Al-Assad Air Base sprawled across the desert like a wounded metal beast, its hangars and control towers silhouetted against an orange dawn sky. The 747's engines wound down as Valentina pressed her face to the window, scanning the airfield with practiced eyes. 3 Apache helicopters sat grounded near the maintenance hangars, rotors drooping like broken wings. A pair of F-16s occupied the far runway, but she could see ground crews scrambling around them, likely mechanical issues that had grounded the entire ready squadron. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd built her consulting empire by identifying exactly these kinds of maintenance bottlenecks and logistics failures. Now those same systematic weaknesses had left America's most strategic forward base defensively naked, just as insurgent forces mounted their most ambitious assault in years. All passengers remain seated until further notice, the captain announced, his voice tighter now. Through the cockpit radio chatter bleeding through the intercom, Valentina caught fragments of panicked transmissions. Estimate 300 hostiles moving from the north. Mortars have our western perimeter zeroed. Need close air support immediately or we're going to be overrun. She stood despite the captain's orders, moving through the cabin with the fluid grace of someone accustomed to aircraft in crisis. The flight attendant who approached her stopped mid-sentence when she saw Valentina's eyes, no longer the soft brown of a pampered billionaire, but the predator's gaze of someone calculating angles of attack and ammunition loads. "Ma'am, you need to. Where's the crew entrance?" Valentina's voice carried an authority that made the younger woman step back instinctively. "And I need to speak with your captain. Now." The flight attendant looked ready to argue until another mortar round exploded close enough to rattle the aircraft's windows. Passengers began stirring, murmurs of confusion rippling through the cabin as the reality of their situation began to sink in. They were trapped on a military base under active assault, with nowhere to run and no protection except whatever defensive positions the base could maintain. Within minutes, Valentina stood in the cockpit beside Captain Morrison, whose weathered face had gone pale as he absorbed the scope of the situation. "We can't take off in this," he said, gesturing toward the tactical display showing hostile positions surrounding the airfield. "Those mortars will turn us into scrap metal before we clear the runway." "Then we don't take off," Valentina said quietly. "We give these people a fighting chance." She pulled out her phone, showing him the encrypted message from Ghost. "I'm going to need that crew door opened." Morrison's eyes widened as he read the message, then studied her face with new understanding. "Jesus Christ, you're military. Former military. Current problem solver." She was already moving toward the exit, mind shifting into combat mode as she calculated the distance to the hangars, the enemy's likely positions, and the precious minutes slipping away while 5,000 American personnel waited for salvation that would never come through conventional channels. The crew door opened with a hydraulic hiss, revealing the chaos of a base under siege. Desert heat slammed into Valentina like a physical wall as she stepped onto the tarmac, the familiar scent of jet fuel and cordite filling her nostrils. Al-Assad's control tower loomed to her left, its windows already spiderwebbed with bullet strikes. Smoke rose from the northern perimeter where tracer rounds drew deadly light shows against the dawn sky. The base's defensive positions were holding, but barely. She could hear the discipline beginning to fray in the radio chatter as ammunition ran low and casualties mounted. A Humvee screeched to a halt beside the aircraft, its driver a young sergeant whose body armor was already stained with someone else's blood. "Ma'am, you need to get to the bunkers." "I need to get to Hangar 7, Valentina cut him off, climbing into the passenger seat with practiced efficiency. "And I need you to drive like our lives depend on it." The sergeant's eyes widened as he recognized something in her bearing, the unmistakable confidence of someone who'd walked through hell and found it wanting. "Yes, ma'am." He gunned the engine, weaving between concrete barriers and defensive positions as mortars bracketed their path. Hangar 7 stood at the eastern edge of the flight line, its massive doors partially open to reveal the angular silhouette that had haunted enemy nightmares for decades. The A-10 Thunderbolt II crouched in the shadows like a predator waiting to be unleashed, 30 feet of titanium-armored death machine built around a cannon that could turn main battle tanks into scrap metal. Its twin engines sat high on the fuselage, protected from ground fire, while the cockpit's titanium bathtub could withstand direct hits from anti-aircraft artillery. "Ghost," Valentina called as she sprinted toward the aircraft. Colonel Rodriguez emerged from behind the A-10's wing, his lined face breaking into the first smile she'd seen since landing. Marcus Rodriguez had been her squadron commander during the worst days in Afghanistan, the man who taught her that sometimes the only way home was through the enemy. "Knew you'd come," he said simply, pulling her into a brief embrace that smelled of hydraulic fluid and determination. "Maintenance finished the pre-flight 20 minutes ago. She's armed with a full load of 30mm, 8 Hellfires, and 2 pods of Hydra rockets. The insurgents have been moving into position all night. We count at least 3 companies with heavy weapons, including what looks like stolen Russian anti-aircraft systems. Valentina walked around the A-10 with the reverence of a master craftsman examining her finest tool. Her hands traced the aircraft's scarred skin, feeling the familiar comfort of an airplane built to absorb punishment and keep flying. This particular warthog bore the scars of dozens of combat missions, its nose art depicting a coiled viper with fangs bared, her old call sign rendered in defiant paint. "How long do we have?" she asked, already mentally calculating attack vectors and ammunition priorities. "Perimeter's holding, but barely. Maybe 30 minutes before they break through." Ghost's voice carried the weight of command decisions that balanced American lives against impossible odds. "Viper, I won't lie to you, this is a suicide mission. Those SAM sites they've set up will light you up the moment you clear the deck." Valentina was already climbing the crew ladder, her body remembering movements burned into muscle memory through thousands of hours in similar cockpits. "Then, I guess it's time to remind them why they used to wake up screaming my name." The cockpit of an A-10 Thunderbolt II was never designed for comfort. It was built for survival. As Valentina strapped herself into the ejection seat, her hands moved across switches and displays with the unconscious precision of a pianist playing a beloved concerto. Engine start procedures, weapons systems checks, communications arrays. Each step brought her closer to the moment when she would once again become the apex predator of close air support. The twin General Electric turbofans spooled up with their distinctive whine, sending vibrations through the airframe that felt like a warhorse pawing the ground. Outside the cockpit, ground crews cleared the hangar as she ran through her final systems checks. Navigation computers aligned, targeting systems online, cannon armed and ready with its tank-killing depleted uranium rounds. "Tower, this is Viper 1, requesting immediate takeoff clearance for close air support mission," she transmitted, her voice carrying across the base's emergency frequency. The response came back immediately, tinged with desperate hope. "Viper 1, you are cleared for immediate takeoff, any runway. We have friendlies all along the northern and western perimeters, danger close situations authorized. God help us all." As she taxied toward the runway, Valentina caught glimpses of the battle through her canopy. Marine positions along the perimeter were taking concentrated fire, their defensive positions clearly marked by the green tracers of American weapons returning fire against the red streams of enemy AK-47s. Mortar rounds continued to fall with methodical precision, walking closer to critical infrastructure with each salvo. The runway stretched ahead, 3 miles of concrete that represented the thin line between organized defense and catastrophic overrun. At the far end, she could see muzzle flashes from enemy positions that had advanced close enough to interdict takeoffs. They'd planned this well, positioning anti-aircraft systems to create an overlapping kill zone that should have made air support impossible. "Viper 1, be advised we're tracking multiple SAM signatures bearing nor-northwest of your position. Estimate SA-18 shoulder-fired systems and at least one vehicle-mounted SAM battery." "Copy that, Tower, beginning takeoff roll." Valentina pushed the throttles forward, feeling the A-10's massive engines respond with their characteristic growl. The aircraft accelerated down the runway with deceptive slowness. Warthogs were never fast, but they were inexorable. As she approached rotation speed, the first surface-to-air missile streaked toward her like a deadly comet, its smoke trail drawing a line across the morning sky. She pulled back on the stick, lifting the A-10 into its natural element, and keyed her radio one last time before entering the maelstrom. "Tower, Viper 1 is airborne. Time to go hunting." The morning sky over Al-Assad transformed into a three-dimensional chessboard of death as Valentina climbed through 2,000 feet. Her head-up display painted target symbols across the landscape below, enemy positions marked in red, friendly forces outlined in green, with danger-close situations flashing amber warnings throughout her field of view. The first SAM had missed, confused by the A-10's low heat signature and her aggressive defensive maneuvering, but she could see two more missiles already in flight. Viper 1, we have troops in contact along grid squares 7-4 through 8-2. Marine Company is pinned down by heavy machine gun positions in those buildings to your north. They've got maybe 10 minutes before being overrun. Valentina rolled the A-10 into a shallow dive, descending through the missile envelope while her targeting computer painted the enemy positions with laser designation. Through her canopy, she could see the tactical situation with crystalline clarity. Approximately 300 insurgents had infiltrated through a network of irrigation canals and abandoned structures, using the terrain to mask their approach until they were close enough to overwhelm the base's outer defenses. The building's ghost had identified sat clustered around what had once been a small village, their flat roofs now bristling with heavy weapons that poured sustained fire into marine positions. She could see muzzle flashes from at least 6 different positions, coordinated fire that spoke of professional military training rather than the usual insurgent tactics. Copy Tower, beginning attack run on northern building complex. Danger close, troops mark your positions with smoke. She lined up her first pass, the GAU-8 cannons targeting reticle settling over the largest building where the heaviest fire originated. The Avenger cannon was the A-10's primary weapon, a 7-barrel rotating monster that fired depleted uranium rounds at nearly 4,000 rounds per minute. Each round could penetrate tank armor. Against reinforced concrete and human targets, the effect was apocalyptic. Viper 1, friendlies marked with purple smoke, danger close 100 meters. Valentina squeezed the trigger, and the universe exploded into violence. The GAU-8 fired with a sound like the world tearing apart, its muzzle flash visible even in daylight as 70 rounds per second hammered into the target building. Concrete walls disintegrated under the assault, sending chunks of debris spinning through the air as the depleted uranium rounds punched through everything in their path. The building disappeared in a cloud of dust and smoke, along with the heavy machine gun nest that had been pinning down 2 squads of Marines. But even as she pulled up from the attack run, Valentina could see secondary positions opening fire from concealment, their tracers reaching up toward her aircraft like deadly fingers. Good effect on target, Viper 1. Building destroyed, enemy fire from that position has ceased. We've got another concentration 2 clicks west, looks like mortar positions with infantry support. She banked left, rolling into position for her next attack as the first anti-aircraft rounds began exploding around her aircraft. The A-10 shuddered through the blast fragments, its armored cockpit protecting her from everything except direct hits. This was what the Warthog had been designed for, flying low and slow through the heaviest ground fire, absorbing punishment that would destroy any other aircraft while delivering precision devastation to enemy positions. The air war had begun in earnest. Banking into a hard left turn, Valentina felt the respond like a faithful warhorse, its thick wings cutting through the turbulent air as anti-aircraft fire bracketed her position. The aircraft's titanium bathtub cockpit was legendary for its ability to protect pilots from ground fire, but she wasn't planning to test those limits any more than necessary. Through her canopy, she could see the mortar positions that Tower had identified, 4 80-tomb tubes positioned in a rough square, their crews working with mechanical precision to rain high-explosive death onto marine defensive positions. Viper 1, be advised those mortar positions have been walking rounds toward our fuel depot. If they hit those tanks, we lose our ability to refuel any aircraft. The tactical implications hit her immediately. Al-Assad's fuel depot represented the lifeline for every aircraft operation in the region. Without it, the base would be defensively naked for weeks, while fuel supplies were trucked in through hostile territory. The insurgents weren't just trying to overrun the base. They were attempting to cripple America's entire operational capacity in western Iraq. She rolled into her attack dive, selecting a Hellfire missile for precision engagement. The AGM-114 was a 17-pound precision-guided munition designed to destroy tanks, but it would serve admirably against concentrated infantry positions. Her targeting system locked onto the largest mortar pit, painting it with laser designation as the missile's seeker head acquired the target. Viper 1 engaging mortar positions with Hellfires, danger close. The missile dropped from its pylon with a soft thunk, its rocket motor igniting as it streaked toward the target at Mach 1.3. Valentina was already lining up her next target when the first Hellfire impacted, erasing the mortar pit in a ball of orange flame and flying debris. The explosion triggered secondary detonations as mortar rounds cooked off, sending gouts of smoke and flame skyward. 3 mortars down, 1 remaining. But as she rolled toward the final target, her radar warning receiver began screaming with the distinctive tone of missile lock. Somewhere below, an A-10 shoulder-fired SAM had acquired her aircraft and was preparing to fire. The operator would be tracking her turn radius, leading her flight path to ensure the heat-seeking missile found its target. Missile launch, SAM in flight bearing 040. Valentina rolled hard right, diving toward the deck while dispensing chaff and flares from her defensive systems. The A-10 dropped like a stone, its twin engines screaming as she pushed the aircraft beyond normal operating limits. Behind her, the SAM curved through the sky like a pursuing demon, its proximity fuse armed and ready to detonate within killing range of her aircraft. At 300 feet, she leveled out and began a desperate game of cat-and-mouse among the concrete buildings and abandoned vehicles that littered the landscape. The missile, designed to engage high-altitude targets, struggled to maintain lock in the ground clutter. Its seeker head wavered between the A-10's heat signature and the hot metal of burning vehicles, finally detonating harmlessly against a concrete wall as she jinked hard left. SAM defeated, Viper 1 continuing attack. But victory came at a cost. The evasive maneuvers had carried her into the engagement envelope of a different threat. The ZPU-4 anti-aircraft gun opened fire from a concealed position near the village center, its 14.5 barrels creating a wall of lead that even the A-10's armor couldn't entirely deflect. Valentina felt the aircraft shudder as multiple rounds found their mark, punching through aluminum skin and severing hydraulic lines. Her flight controls became sluggish as backup systems engaged, warning lights illuminating across her instrument panel like a malevolent Christmas tree. Viper 1, we're seeing smoke from your aircraft. Are you hit? She was more than hit. She was flying a wounded bird that should by all rights be heading for the emergency airfield. But below her, she could see Marine positions being systematically destroyed by the remaining mortar and the ZPU's devastating fire. Young Americans were dying while she contemplated survival. Minor damage, continuing mission, she transmitted, banking toward the anti-aircraft position with grim determination. The cannon that had wounded her aircraft would die by her hand, even if it meant flying straight into its killing zone. She lined up the GAU-8 for a head-on attack, the targeting computer struggling to maintain lock as hydraulic fluid streamed from damaged systems. The ZPU's crew had seen her coming and were traversing their weapon to meet her attack, 4 barrels swinging toward her like the eyes of some mechanical spider. It became a question of who would fire first and who would survive the exchange. The duel between aircraft and anti-aircraft gun played out in the span of heartbeats, but for Valentina, time dilated into crystalline slow motion. She could see the ZPU's 4 barrels tracking toward her A-10, their rate of traverse steady and professional. The gun crew had clearly faced aircraft before. They weren't panicking or rushing their aim, just methodically bringing their weapon to bear with the patience of experienced killers. Her own targeting reticle drifted across the gun position as damaged hydraulics struggled to maintain precise control. Warning lights continued to cascade across her instrument panel, hydraulic pressure dropping, backup systems engaged, flight controls degraded. The A-10 was living up to its reputation for surviving battle damage, but even warthogs had their limits. "Come on, you bastard," she whispered, willing the targeting computer to achieve lock as the range closed to 800 meters. At this distance, both weapons were well within killing range. The ZPU's 14.5 rounds could penetrate her cockpit armor with a direct hit, while her GAU-8 would obliterate the entire gun position with a 1-second burst. The ZPU fired first. Muzzle flashes erupted from all 4 barrels as the weapon sent a stream of heavy machine gun rounds toward her aircraft. Valentina felt the buck and shudder as multiple hits found their mark, punching through wing sections and fuselage with metallic crashes that echoed through her helmet. But the Warthog kept flying, its redundant systems and armored design absorbing punishment that would have downed any other aircraft. Her targeting reticle steadied on the gun position. She squeezed the trigger. The GAU-8 responded with its characteristic roar, sending 70 depleted uranium rounds per second into the ZPU position at nearly 3,000 feet per second. The anti-aircraft gun simply vanished, erased by high-velocity projectiles that continued through the position to chew up everything within a 50-meter radius. The gun crew never had time to realize they were dead. "Good kill on the AAA position, Viper 1. That gun was chewing up our guys pretty bad." But even as Tower celebrated her success, Valentina was already scanning for her next target. The tactical display showed enemy positions throughout the village complex, with Marine units still pinned down by coordinated small arms fire. She had 6 Hellfires remaining, plus nearly 800 rounds for the cannon and 2 full rocket pods. Enough firepower to shift the tactical balance, if she could survive long enough to employ it effectively. "Viper 1, we've got a large group of hostiles moving through the canal system toward our southern perimeter. Estimate company strength unit with heavy weapons. They'll be in assault position in 10 minutes. She banked south, her damaged aircraft responding sluggishly to control inputs. Through the cracked portion of her canopy, she could see the irrigation canal system that the insurgents were using for concealment, a network of concrete-lined channels that provided covered approaches to within grenade-throwing distance of Marine positions. The tactical genius of the enemy plan was becoming clear. While mortars and anti-aircraft positions fixed American attention to the north, the main assault force had been infiltrating through dead ground to the south. By the time the Marines realized the true direction of attack, it would be too late to reposition their defensive fires. She armed her rocket pods, selecting high-explosive fragmentation rounds designed to clear trenches and suppress infantry. The Hydra 70 rockets weren't as precise as Hellfires, but they delivered devastating area effects against troops in the open. Beginning rocket attack on southern canal system. All friendlies take cover. The first enemy soldiers were already climbing out of the canal when her rockets arrived like the wrath of an angry god. The Hydra rockets streaked from their pods in pairs, drawing smoke trails across the morning sky before impacting along the canal system with precisely timed detonations. Each 2.75-inch rocket carried a 17-pound high-explosive warhead designed to fragment into thousands of steel splinters, turning the concrete-lined channels into killing zones where no human could survive. Valentina walked the rocket strikes along 800 meters of canal, methodically collapsing sections of concrete and sealing off the enemy's covered approach routes. The insurgents who had been advancing through the system found themselves trapped in a nightmare of smoke, flame, and flying debris. Those who tried to climb out of the channels met withering fire from repositioned Marine units who now knew exactly where to aim. "Outstanding. Viper 1, you just saved our asses down here. Enemy assault force is broken and retreating." But even as she pulled up from the attack run, Valentina could feel her aircraft deteriorating around her. The A-10 was trailing more smoke now, and her engine parameters were showing concerning fluctuations. Multiple warning lights indicated damage to critical systems, fuel transfer problems, electrical failures, and what looked like structural damage to the left wing root. She tried to push such concerns aside as her radio crackled with new intelligence. Viper 1, we've got reports of a large convoy moving toward the base from the northwest. Initial count suggests at least 20 vehicles, including what appears to be multiple rocket launchers. ETA 15 minutes. 20 vehicles meant this wasn't just an infantry assault. The insurgents had brought mechanized support, including the multiple rocket launchers that could saturate the entire base with high explosives. If that convoy reached firing position, al-Assad would be transformed into a crater regardless of how well the perimeter defenses performed. She banked northwest, her targeting systems struggling to acquire the convoy through the heat shimmer of the desert morning. At maximum range, she could just make out the dust cloud kicked up by the approaching vehicles, but they were still too far away for effective engagement with her remaining weapons. The tactical mathematics were brutal in their simplicity. She had 4 Hellfires and perhaps 200 cannon rounds remaining, enough to engage maybe 6 of the 20 vehicles before her ammunition was exhausted. The convoy would overwhelm al-Assad's defenses through sheer weight of numbers, unless she could find some way to multiply her killing power. Then she saw it, a fuel tanker truck positioned in the center of the convoy, its distinctive shape unmistakable even at long range. Automotive fuel wouldn't create the devastating explosion of aviation gas or military ordnance, but it would burn hot and long enough to create chaos within the tightly packed vehicle formation. Tower, Viper 1 has visual on the convoy. I'm going to try something. Have all personnel take hard cover and prepare for a big secondary explosion. She selected her largest remaining Hellfire and began her attack dive, pushing her wounded aircraft toward the limits of its performance envelope. The convoy was spreading out now, individual vehicles diverging from the main road as they approached firing positions. She would have one chance to hit the fuel tanker before the formation dispersed beyond the range of a single explosion. At 2,000 meters, she achieved missile lock and fired. The Hellfire missile arced across the desert like an arrow of technological vengeance, its laser guidance system holding lock on the fuel tanker, despite the heat distortion and battlefield chaos. Valentina held her breath as she watched the missile's flight path, knowing that everything depended on the next few seconds. Behind her, al-Assad's defenders watched the sky with desperate hope, their ammunition running low and their positions increasingly untenable. The missile found its target with surgical precision. The fuel tanker erupted in a ball of orange flame that climbed hundreds of feet into the morning sky, its shockwave rippling outward through the convoy formation like an invisible fist. Vehicles within 50 meters of the explosion were instantly engulfed in burning fuel, their crews trapped inside mobile crematoriums. The multiple rocket launchers that represented the convoy's primary threat vanished in secondary explosions as their warheads cooked off in the intense heat. Jesus Christ, Viper 1, that was a hell of a shot. We count at least 12 vehicles destroyed or burning. Convoy is breaking up and retreating. Valentina allowed herself a moment of grim satisfaction as she watched the surviving vehicles scatter like startled insects, their coordinated assault dissolving into individual struggles for survival. The main threat to al-Assad had been neutralized, but her fuel gauges showed she was approaching the point of no return. Her damaged aircraft was bleeding fuel and hydraulic fluid, leaving a visible trail across the sky that any competent anti-aircraft gunner could follow. Tower, Viper 1 is bingo fuel and has significant battle damage. Need to know the status of our runway for emergency landing. Viper 1, runway is clear and emergency crews are standing by. You've got the base back, thanks to you. Medical and fire crews are positioned for recovery. As she turned toward al-Assad, Valentina began her emergency checklist procedures, shutting down non-essential systems to preserve what remained of her aircraft's functionality. The left engine was running rough, its exhaust temperature climbing into the red zone, while hydraulic pressure had dropped to the point where her flight controls required constant physical force to maintain level flight. Below her, the base looked different than it had an hour earlier. Smoke still rose from damaged buildings and equipment, but the organized chaos of defensive positions had been replaced by the purposeful movement of troops securing the perimeter and treating wounded. The immediate crisis had passed, but the cost had been paid in American blood and the near destruction of a critical forward base. She lined up for her final approach, the runway stretching ahead like a promise of survival. The A-10's landing gear extended with mechanical groans that spoke of structural damage, but the systems held as she configured for landing. Her approach speed was higher than normal due to the battle damage, but the Warthog's robust design gave her confidence that the aircraft would hold together long enough to reach the ground. Viper 1 on final approach, emergency landing. Copy Viper 1. You're cleared to land any runway emergency equipment standing by. Welcome home. As her main gear touched down on Al-Assad's scarred tarmac, Valentina felt the familiar sensation of a mission completed, and survival earned through skill, luck, and the superior engineering of American military aircraft. The rolled to a stop surrounded by emergency vehicles, its battle-damaged airframe still smoking from the morning's combat. She had saved 5,000 American lives and preserved America's strategic position in western Iraq. But more importantly, she had proven that when the chips were down and conventional forces failed, sometimes all it took was one person willing to climb into a cockpit and fly into hell. The canopy opened with a hydraulic hiss as ground crews swarmed around the aircraft, their faces showing a mixture of awe and relief. Valentina unbuckled her harness and climbed down from the cockpit on unsteady legs, her body still vibrating with adrenaline and the memory of G-forces. Her flight suit was soaked with sweat, and she could taste cordite in the air from the morning's explosions. Ghost appeared at her elbow before her boots touched the tarmac, his weathered face split by a grin that made him look 20 years younger. "God damn, Viper, I forgot how beautiful you are when you're pissed off." He gestured toward the A-10's battle-scarred fuselage, its aluminum skin perforated by dozens of bullet holes. "Maintenance is going to have a field day with this bird." She ran her hand along the aircraft's nose, feeling the rough edges where shrapnel had torn through metal. The Warthog looked like it had flown through a metal storm, but it had brought her home. "She'll fly again," Valentina said with quiet confidence. "These things are built to take a beating." Around them, the aftermath of battle played out in controlled chaos. Medics rushed wounded Marines toward the field hospital, while explosive ordnance teams swept for unexploded rounds. The perimeter defenses were being reinforced with additional positions and ammunition supplies flown in from Kuwait. Al-Assad would be stronger tomorrow than it had been this morning, tempered by fire, and the knowledge that even the best-laid enemy plans could be shattered by American ingenuity and courage. "The brass is already asking questions," Ghost said as they walked toward the command bunker. "How does a billionaire consultant end up saving a forward operating base? There's going to be paperwork, debriefings, probably some kind of medal ceremony that'll make both of us uncomfortable." Valentina paused at the bunker entrance, looking back at the A-10 surrounded by maintenance crews and emergency responders. "You know what they're going to ask, don't you? Why I came back? Why I risked everything for a bunch of strangers on a base I'd never seen before?" Ghost studied her face with the patient attention of someone who'd spent decades reading the invisible language of warriors. "And what are you going to tell them?" She smiled, and for the first time in years it reached her eyes. "That some things are more important than money. That when Americans are in trouble, you don't ask about the odds or the profit margins. You just climb in the cockpit and do what needs to be done." The bunker door closed behind them as they descended into the fluorescent-lit world of military briefing rooms and secure communications. Outside, The desert sun climbed higher into a sky that belonged, for now, to America and the allies who'd earned their freedom through courage and superior firepower. The legend of Viper's return would spread through military channels faster than any official report, carried by the voices of Marines who'd seen death approaching, until an angel of destruction descended from the sky to turn the tide of battle. But in the quiet moments between the chaos and the paperwork, Valentina knew the real truth. She hadn't saved al-Assad to become a hero. She'd done it because walking away would have meant living with the knowledge that Americans had died, while she chose comfort over duty. In the end, that was all the reason she needed. The briefing room deep within al-Assad's command bunker carried the antiseptic smell of recycled air and fresh coffee, its walls lined with tactical displays showing the current disposition of friendly and hostile forces throughout the region. Valentina sat across from a conference table, occupied by faces she recognized from intelligence briefings, senior officers whose names appeared on classified documents and whose decisions shaped American foreign policy in the Middle East. General Patricia, Iron Lady, Morrison commanded the entire theater of operations from her headquarters in Kuwait, but she'd flown to al-Assad personally to debrief the civilian who just altered the strategic balance of power in western Iraq. Her steel-gray hair and weathered face spoke of 3 decades in uniform, climbing through ranks that had historically excluded women until she'd kicked down enough doors to clear the path for others. "Ms. Kozlov," the general began, consulting a classified folder thick enough to serve as body armor, "your file makes for interesting reading. MIT Aerospace Engineering degree, Air Force Academy graduate distinguished.